Power up fall projects with Ego at Lowe's. Every tool delivers power beyond belief. So whether it's leaves, limbs, or lawn cleanup, count on Ego to deliver the power, performance, and innovation you need. And now for a limited time, save up to $60 on select blowers, chainsaws, and pole saws. Shop Ego today at Lowe's. Offers valid through 10/1 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Have you ever wanted to dive deeper into the horror movies you love? Beyond the Blood is a horror podcast for fans who want more than just surface-level screams. We do deep dives into the movies that shaped us, digging into director commentaries, behind-the-scenes stories, deleted scenes, and the special features that most people skip. Each episode is a love letter to the genre. We break down how these films were made, the creative risks that paid off or didn't, and the lasting impact they've had on the genre as a whole. From 70s slashers to modern nightmares, we celebrate the craft, chaos, and characters that keep us coming back. If you're the kind of fan who rewatches movies with the commentary on, or you simply grew up in the video store horror aisle, the Beyond the Blood podcast was made for you. New episodes every single week. Subscribe, and let's dig deep. Welcome to the Beyond the Blood podcast.
Hello, filthy movie lovers. My name is Gentry Austin.
And I'm Casey Scott.
And we're the hosts of the Sin Syndicate, film podcast for something weirdos, anti-criterion bros, and Joseph Sarno aficionados. Join us semi-weekly as we peer into the adults-only theaters and sticky-floored cinemas of the golden age of sexploitation, when the morals were loose, the laws were murky, and the intercourse was all simulated. Find us now on the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
We are back and we're talking about Negative Reaction. It is the second episode of the fourth season. It came out originally October 6th, 1974, directed by Alf Kjellin, written by Peter S. Fisher, who was the showrunner at this time, story editor, and starring the one and only, oh my God, it's so funny when he comes in and trips over that ottoman. It is Dick Van Dyke as Paul Galesko. He is a very snooty, world-famous photographer. I guess photographers could make a lot of money back then, or I guess when you're charging $24.99 for a book, you're going to be making money hand over fist, my friend. So, yes, it is the one and only Dick Van Dyke playing against type in a big way, playing Paul Galesko, major dickhead. One of my favorite episodes, I think it is. I had such a fun time going back and rewatching this one. But Chris, I'm so curious, what are your impressions of Negative Reaction?
So Dick Van Dyke is 98 years old, by the way, which is good for him. I don't have a lot of experience with Dick Van Dyke. Given my age, I feel like the things that I know Dick Van Dyke for are Mary Poppins, which I never really saw as a kid, but I saw Night at the Museum. So that's what I know him from, because he plays one of the guards of the museum at the beginning of the movie, along with another classic star of stage and screen, Mickey Rooney. So it's the two of them kind of hassling Ben Stiller. So I don't have a lot of experience with Dick Van Dyke. However, this is a Columbo episode, so my experience with Dick Van Dyke maybe isn't as important. All that to say, I liked the episode. I will say, I don't know if the episode needed to be an hour and a half long, but I feel, and maybe this is just me remembering wistfully the days past of this show, I feel like I've said that more frequently than not recently, where it's like, this could have used 10 minutes cut out of it. We don't need Peter Falk bulking it up all the time, but they're going to let him do it because that's this show. But I feel like I do have to point out that, again, I enjoyed this episode, but there are some things in this episode that are just, why are we doing this here? Why are we doing this here? Show, of all the places and things to do it, I'm curious where you're coming at this from as one of your favorite episodes, because I can assume the reasons, but I want to know exactly, because there's some stuff in this episode that, it's just like, why are we, it feels like we've done this before even.
It so feels like we've done this before, especially the episode where the guy hired the dude who, it was Publisher Parrish. The whole idea of the crazy bomb guy so reminds me of Alvin Deschler, the Don Gordon role. To see Don Gordon playing that meek and mild character, even though he's not that meek and not that mild, especially like when it comes out that he had talked with the camera salesman and just bought a $20 camera, but then asked for the receipt to be made out for $100 and gave the guy an extra 10 so he could collect more money from Galesko. I thought it was nice. I'm like, yeah, that's the Don Gordon I know. But otherwise, he's just like, oh, yeah, sure, Mr. Galesko, whatever you want, I'll do whatever you want. Man, you are set up. You are going down for this crime, buddy, until Columbo comes on the case. And I totally agree with you. There are a lot of moments in this episode where I'm like, okay, this really didn't need to be here. The whole Larry Storch scene doesn't have to be there, but I have so much fun with it. I love it, though. And you can tell that Falk is having a hard time even keeping a straight face. He's just eating it up, and nobody plays flustered like Larry Storch can.
Yeah. God, we're here already, aren't we? I feel like the Larry Storch and Joyce Van Patten of it all, it's definitely the two of them where that's 20 minutes that you could have just snipped right out of the episode. And look, John Ashton, on the other hand, I'm not asking you to cut John Ashton out of the episode. He's already balding. He's got that hair. He's smoking that cigarette. He looks young. He looks good. He works well opposite Peter Falk. But yeah, some of the stuff in this episode with Joyce Van Patten's character and the homeless shelter was just, oh, you look like a homeless guy. Does he, though? Does Columbo look like a homeless guy? Really? I think it's funny that she thinks that. Obviously, that's the bit. But I don't believe for a second anyone's going to be misremembering Columbo for a homeless person. He doesn't look that bedraggled. I guess maybe to a nun he does.
I really like that. And of course, our old friend Vito Scotti coming back in this one, playing the drunk, getting, two scenes at least in here. We hear about him in a third scene where he's talking with the police. But yeah, I like that stuff. This one, normally I would be like, what the hell? Like that whole computer printout thing that we were talking about recently and how long that went on for no good reason. But this just feels like it gives Falk more to chew on. But I can totally see where you're coming from. I could see not liking those scenes, but I'm just eating it up with a spoon.
I like the scene where he's in the camera store. I like that scene a fair amount because, again, it's just like Columbo plays dumb so well, and he knows how to get information out of people in a way that's just, I don't know, it feels effortless with him. And in that scene, I love how he can play at times flustered, but at the same time constantly digging for information. And I love how he digs. I love the way the character is written in this episode. In terms of the way Columbo as a character is written in this episode, because that's the other thing we have to take into account. Most of these episodes aren't being written by the same people week to week. So it's someone taking Columbo, a character that's set in stone, quote unquote, and then amplifying him through their lens of what they want to do and not losing sight of the way the character's kind of base interpretation needs to be addressed. I think this episode does a really good job at keeping true to the Columbo character, which has been lost in some of the episodes we've seen recently, where it's like, why is he, it's not why is he in this, but why is this a case that Columbo's being brought in for is probably the better way of looking at these, because Columbo's just a cop at the end of the day. He's a detective. But it's the cases that he's brought in on that allow him to show his expertise of deduction.
It really does give him a chance to flex and, like you said, just keep true to that Columbo-ness of this. And yeah, those scenes where it's a little long in the tooth, I think that's just him taking it out for a walk and just doing his thing with that. I'm okay. There are times where, yes, it is very annoying where you're just like, okay, let's get back to the story. But I felt like those moments added to it quite a bit. Yeah, maybe not so much with Scotti and the talk about the time in between the shots, but I feel like all of these scenes really add up. And we complained last time about just the lack of clues, whereas this episode feels like it is just a bevy, a treasure trove of all of these different clues, because we've got Galesko thinking that he is so much smarter than everybody else involved, thinks that he's got everything on lock, comes up with excuses like that. And that's one of the things I really like, is just whenever Columbo comes at him with something, because Columbo is one more thinging so much in this episode. I counted at least 4 times that he does a one more thing. And every time he comes back, he's just like, oh, what about this? And Galesko's like, obviously, like, why did it take so long between this time and this time? Oh, this is what must have happened, or this is must be what this other person was thinking, and just coming up with those excuses. And I love that every time he does that, Columbo, of course, is just like, all right. And then he writes down and says out loud what the excuse was. I'm like, oh man, that just makes it sound so phony, because it is.
Yeah, in terms of the dastardliness of the villain, man, Dick Van Dyke, I think definitely he murders his wife with a gun.
Yeah.
He shoots her. Point blank.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's not, would you say it's shocking for this show?
A little bit, though. Some incredible film scholar on IMDb talks about how the Luger that he shoots her with is obviously not loaded, because usually it's very good practice to have live ammunition and a weapon when you're filming something.
I've heard.
Yeah.
I've heard. And in upcoming court cases, we may figure out how that's not the case. Weird. Yeah. I can't. Can you imagine going on IMDb and posting that on the episode of Columbo, being so bent out of shape? They're not practicing good gun form. No good trigger form. Okay. I mean, calm down. It's Dick Van Dyke, for fuck's sake. But I like the idea that he just murders his wife in cold blood, just shoots her point blank in the head, kills her. Like, it's, I don't know. He's so matter of fact about it. And look, God, I'm not going to say that this is a well that the show goes to, but these shrews of partners.
Total Harridan. Yeah.
I know. It's, God damn it, show. Does she have to be this gorgonite of a human being, this monster that I feel bad for him in that he has to kill her to get rid of her and he can't just divorce her. But at the same time, like, why not just divorce her, dude? You're going to go to jail.
And I don't know if his secretary is into him or not, if he just is planning this out.
Intention is what it feels like.
It feels like that's his intention, but I don't know if she's aware of the plan. They're like, them going off to the Philippines together. It feels like that's when he's going to make his move and be like, oh, I'm so broken up by the death of my wife. If only I had someone here to comfort me and fuck me.
Right. If only I had some ass, willing and available ass. God. And can you imagine the mustache ride you'd be getting from Dick Van Dyke with this facial hair that he's got? Good Lord. His facial hair in this episode is off the chain, man. That beard. Look, so this was what, in the 70s, 40 years ago, 50 years ago now. So yeah, so Dick Van Dyke is in his mid 40s. They gave him the facial hair to make him look older, right? They have to, because he's going gray at 40.
Oh yeah, he's been gray for a long time.
Has he? Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just have very little exposure to Dick Van Dyke as an actor. That's very far outside of my time range as a human being alive. Like I said, by the time I was born, Dick Van Dyke was in his fucking 60s.
Obviously, the reruns of the Dick Van Dyke Show were all over the place when I was growing up. He had been in a bunch of movies, of course, Mary Poppins, like you mentioned. He became a TV detective himself, and he was in Diagnosis Murder. So that was an okay one. We don't tend to watch that. We're not a Diagnosis Murder house here in Westland, but he seemed to be all over the place, especially because right around this time in the 70s, he was actually a spokesperson for cameras, or Kodak, I think, which was ironic that he's the photographer in this.
The Kodak Pocket Instamatic camera starts at less than $28. The complete outfit's a little more. Just tell them to remember which pocket they put it in. The Kodak Pocket Instamatic camera.
And then also he was in a ton of PSAs, like the whole stop, drop, and roll. Like I learned stop, drop, and roll from Dick Van Dyke in his commercials.
I'm rolling because I want to show you what to do if your clothes ever catch on fire. Because the fire won't just burn your clothes, it'll burn you. So don't run. Don't stand up at all. Just fall down and roll. That way it'll squash out the fire and save your skin. So remember, your clothes ever catch on fire, roll, roll, roll your body.
It's also weird that he had his own show. He ends up getting his own show that runs for 8 years. Good Lord.
Yeah, and then just all the movies that he was in. I want to say he might have been in a movie called Cold Turkey about quitting smoking. I could be wrong about that, but yeah, he was in a lot of, because this is also the era going into the 70s of more of the live action Disney stuff, and I seem to remember him doing a lot of that as well. So yeah, he was definitely a big presence, though not big enough where this was just like such a shocker to me to see him play a bad guy, but I know it was for a lot of people.
That was the other thing I was wondering, is how big of a shock is it that this actor is playing a villain? And again, like a pretty dastardly villain. I am surprised in a lot of ways that this guy gets his hands as dirty as he does, because the other villain that was doing this did not get his hands this dirty. The idea was, I'm paying someone else to get their hands dirty. And this guy is just, he's just the patsy. He's just the fall guy. He doesn't even know he's the fall guy. And I'm not saying in the other episode he knew, but in the other episode, he was the one who committed the crime. Dick Van Dyke is the one who commits the crime here. So he's that much worse, because he's the one, he's wanting to do it. He's wanting to murder his wife. He wants to be the one to do it. And it's like, oh man, he's a real piece of shit. And I think Dick Van Dyke plays it really well. But yeah, again, like I just wanted to have some context, because my assumption was shocking to see Dick Van Dyke being this much of an asshole as a character.
But I love it. I love that he's the mouse that Columbo gets to play with for an hour and a half, because that's the thing too, is that the worse the villain, the better it is to see them get their comeuppance, and to see Columbo have this mounting pile of evidence and just one thing after another. And we haven't even talked about the end of this, and I want to save that for a little bit from now, but just to have all of these little pieces constantly going, it just makes it even sweeter to me when he finally gets his just desserts.
There's a lot of things that go into getting to the ending. We have to get to the point where Columbo understands cameras. We have to get to the point where Columbo understands film composition. We have to get to the point where Columbo understands how that back and forth between him and Deschler, how that went back and forth because of the timing of it all. And then there's a couple other like small pieces of evidence. He sees his pants don't have the powder burn, or it does have the powder burn on his pants, but there's not one on the other guy. So it's how did it, like, kick the gun and all this horse shit. But what I like is, to your point, the several bigger components build on to one another to create a whole piece of information that is used to catch him. And I think for me, even though there are parts of this episode that don't necessarily outright work, the way that he is caught is not the best part of the episode, but the way that he is caught, I think, is up there for some of the best ways in terms of utilizing everything we've seen holistically to make one singular, this is it, it's this thing, and I'm using all the seemingly disparate things together to make something make sense. I like that almost more than most of the ways people have been caught up until this point in the show.
The end of this episode is basically a drawing room sequence. This is as close to Ms. Marple and Hercule Poirot as we get, which I think is fantastic. And yeah, you get all those little things like, why did you write $50,000 rather than the address? Like, it would be so much more difficult to remember the address than the $50,000. Now, that could be a major clue for any other episode, but for this one, it's basically just another nail in the coffin. And not even a nail, a thumbtack in the coffin, because he just keeps getting those. And I love that this one does have substance. It is not one of these, oh, the shoes were tied wrong. And it's like, oh, for fuck's sake. Like,
there was a marble in the trunk. Like,
yeah, it's like, what? But this one is like a little bigger. It just snowballs through this whole thing. And that's one of the things I like, is even with this longer time, you get so much more of the clues and so much more of the buildup. And I think that it also helps to make this episode a little bit more impactful, because it does take longer, that you're just like getting more of this rhythm of how things keep building and sinking Galesko with his whole bullshit story.
And look, as much as the Larry Storch scene is, again, like, it's in the last 10 minutes of the episode too. It's the final 10 minutes before, it's the second to last 10 minutes before the actual final 10 minutes. So we spend 10 minutes with him and Columbo getting to the point where he's like, will you sign an affidavit saying, like, you were in the car with this guy, you're his alibi. It comes late enough that I don't think, I get that it ends up being the biggest piece of information in terms of, you've perjured yourself here, pal. But yeah, it's interesting. Not a lot of episodes have been revealing clues up until the last 10 minutes. There's kind of other things going on that the episode is busying itself with. And this episode, like, it has to get to that point to finally have all of the information. And this is the button that they're putting on it.
That's the thing, is he hasn't perjured himself. Dick Van Dyke laid out the story, has everything so perfect. But then when Columbo does that dunderheaded, quote unquote, thing of reversing the negative, and suddenly the clock moves from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Oh no, your story doesn't now match up. And it has to match up. Just that way that he has built everything so perfectly. Dick Van Dyke has built this entire house, and then Columbo is just fucking up and just being like, no, it's 10 o'clock instead. And it's just, what? You idiot. Of course it's 2 o'clock. Marches over there, opens up that camera. See, there's the negative. Holy fucking shit.
Yeah. Got his ass good.
Oh my God. And then when Columbo
saw this. You saw that, right?
Were you a witness to what he just did? Were you a witness to what he just did? Were you a witness to what he just did? I'm just like, oh, is this like a reference to like Peter in the Gospels or something? Like 3 times he gets caught by these guys. Yes, they will all swear that they just saw him go over to that camera, open it up. You didn't pick that camera or that camera or that. I just love, man. This is one of those primo, you got him moments for Columbo. This is up there for me with the pulling the gloves out of the pockets moment.
And the fact that the way that they set the scene up initially is they come in with Columbo and he's sitting there redoing the ransom letter. And you think that it's going to be that. And you think that is going to be how he gets him. They fake you out within the scene itself, which I think for me is the most important part about this episode, is this episode keeps you guessing on how Columbo's going to do it. Columbo's going to catch him. That's always a known. Like, by the end of the episode, this person's not getting away. So how we get there is just so important. And the fact that this episode is unwilling to rest on its laurels, even in the last 3 minutes, I think is so impressive, because it's committed to the bit, as it were. It's actually committed to writing this kind of story the way this kind of story should be written, which is just when you think you've got it all figured out, there's even one more thing going on here. And this episode does that in a way that really Columbo hasn't. And when it does, it's the best episodes of the show.
I love the pacing of that last scene. And yeah, you're right. That whole thing where he's got the note and he's just like, look at all these little bits. Look at all these little bits of paper. And just that he had made Van Dyke come up with the excuse for why the newspapers were there, but not the rest of the scraps and everything. If the woman came in, everything would be gone. And why did she just leave these newspapers?
That she cleaned it up.
Yeah, I just love that. It's like, this doesn't really make sense. And then, yeah, just he keeps building until he gets that whole. And he literally has it under a curtain, which I really appreciate when he takes the sheet off of that blown up photo. Oh, it's so nice. And yeah, just to get him so angry. And not only do we have a clock in that photo and clocks and time and all this, oh, you called at 4:40 or 5:45, but yeah, this call was at 5 o'clock. You're supposed to be there at 5 o'clock. I would have been there early if it was my wife, kind of thing. But then you also have the metaphorical ticking clock of the trip to the Philippines. So we have to get everything done before they leave the country. A little Johnny Cash moment. So I thought that was nice too, that you've got both of those coming together. It's we have to solve this case by this time. Otherwise, this guy's going to get away clean, going to go to another country, will probably never come back.
Yeah, that's the other thing that wins. That once he's gone, he will be gone. And that's because it's made very clear that they have a tenuous grasp on him at the moment, because again, they have to have him admit to doing it. Is really what happened. This is clear that he has to admit it. And look, this is the other thing that I appreciate about this episode, and we've talked about this on other episodes. There have been some of these where it's, this shit's pretty impeachable. Columbo this guy's not going to jail. Columbo's going to get slapped on the wrist. You're trying to do it again, man. Stop it. You can't get people on this circumstantial ass evidence. This time, ain't nothing circumstantial. The only person who could have known which camera it was is the person who was taking those pictures. And there will be, I don't know how there would be any way in a court of law he could get around that. I'm assuming that this guy takes a plea deal is probably what happens. He admitted he did it and goes to jail on 20 years, gets out on 10 for bad behavior. So he's out of jail by the swinging mid-80s anyways, and we just had to kill his wife. I think about that often when we watch the show, because sometimes the show is just like, there's no way these people are actually in trouble. This episode, Dick Van Dyke signs his own death warrant and does it with such aplomb. Oh, you fucking idiot. Like, the one mistake you can't afford to make is the mistake that you made, which is fucking up in front of Columbo, because he is waiting for you to fuck up the only way that he can get you to fuck up, which is this. This whole episode's been building to this one moment of only the person who took the picture the only person who took the picture is the person who was there, and that has to be Dick Van Dyke or somebody else, and he outs himself. And yeah, it's really well done.
I had a false memory about this episode for a long time. I always thought that the main cop that Columbo dealt with was Jerry Van Dyke, the brother of Dick Van Dyke. I don't know why I thought that, but then going back and seeing Michael Strong in this role as the other detective, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, he looks a lot like Jerry Van Dyke did at this time. So I thought that would have been, oh, I can be in your episode, but you got to throw my brother a bone kind of thing. But I really like Michael Strong. I've only seen him that I remember in a few things, but he's in one of my favorites, Point Blank, the Lee Marvin film. So it was really nice to see him in here. And I think that he does a good job of being present, but not overwhelming the narrative. He's not Bob Dishy. He's just like, okay, I'm just this other dude, but he's got enough charisma that you can always tell when he's on screen.
We also mentioned early on that John Ashton is in this episode. He's in it. He's not given much to do, unfortunately. I think Michael Strong is given more to do than he is, and he shows up more throughout the episode. This episode, I think, is strong front to back. Again, the little additional Peter Falk-isms, I just have to deal with that moving forward. Not like it's a bad thing, but like it does. It just, come on. I get it. You're in charge. We get it. Like you're the one telling people where and how to sign and on what line to sign on. We get it, Peter Falk. But I don't know if I need to see you and Larry Storch sit in a car for 10 minutes and you yuck it up.
Yeah, I did have a chance to talk with John Ashton about, because if somebody's on Columbo and I'm talking with them, I will ask them how their experience was. He said he had a great experience on this and that. Peter Falk was a very generous actor and would actually run lines with him. It wasn't just like him in his trailer alone or back someplace just doing his lines. Falk would run those lines with him so he could actually get a real feel for it, which I thought was pretty great.
I get the distinct feeling Peter Falk was an actor's actor, but he was not a director's actor. There are actors that other actors love, and then there are actors that directors love. And then there are actors that actors hate, and then there are actors that directors hate. I think Peter Falk was an actor that directors hated, but actors liked. And I think that's because he stuck up for actors and actors' rights, which if you're in the position that Peter Falk was in, that's not as easy of a thing to do as it would seem, because the visibility of Peter Falk makes it less tenable to do, because why would you endanger your career for other people's career, or just the need to have an industry actually treating people with respect? And Peter Falk thought it was important. And look, it's like anything else. If you open the door, why not let your couple of your friends in through the door too? That's what Peter Falk was doing, clearly. Hulk Hogan was doing it with Brutus the Barber Beefcake his entire career. So some people got to make money. Everybody's got to eat. Vito Scotti's got to be Peter Falk's friend. It sure feels like it at this point.
But I read that Fred Draper's even in this episode at one point. I didn't see him in here, but I'm just like, okay, that makes sense, because he seems to show up in so many of these.
Peter Falk, I think, again, like the stories about him being prickly, I totally get it, but I also want to make clear, like, sometimes the person telling the story is just important as the person the story is being told about. And directors and producers not resonating with Peter Falk and what he does, and that's not surprising, is what I'm getting at.
There wasn't a whole lot of dirt behind this one. I read The Usual Suspects, Mark Dawidziak's book, David Koenig's book, some of the other ones that are on the bookshelf now, which is so nice that we're getting more of these Columbo books. Koenig was talking about some of the actors that were up for the role or had been talked about for the role of Galesko. And then once they got to Dick Van Dyke, it just was a done deal. Luckily, Mr. Koenig has written another book, which is Unshot Columbo, Cracking the Cases That Never Got Filmed. And we'll actually have an interview with him after we're done talking about negative reaction. So I hope that people will stick around and hear that, because it's another amazing book. And to hear from each of these seasons which scripts got picked versus which ones didn't, and how far along some of these scripts got to, it's pretty remarkable. And a season like this, where you got 6 episodes, there are a lot of contenders in the running for being filmed for this one.
Yeah, 6 episodes. It's just that's a lot of people vying for an opportunity at that table. And yeah, because some of those episodes in the last season were like, why were they doing this again? Why waste that time, that precious time that you're given on a retread? And so far this season, I don't feel like either one of these have been real retreads of... They've had elements from other ones, but it hasn't been like a hard and fast total retread.
When we come back next month and we talk about By Dawn's Early Light, this is also the beginning of the Patrick McGoohan era, and McGoohan plays a huge part in Columbo going forward.
Which is completely fucking insane to me. Patrick McGoohan has had nothing to do with the show up until this point, though, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. For those of you that don't know why I'm reacting this way, Patrick McGoohan is someone whose show, The Prisoner, Jess and I covered many moons ago on the One Season show. And Mike, The Prisoner, good show?
Until that last episode.
Holy fuck, ain't it? Good Lord. Anything Patrick McGoohan kind of sends a chill up my spine. Somebody walked over my grave, because Patrick McGoohan's kind of an unfun dude. He was so unfun, he didn't think that James Bond was a character he wanted to play because the character had too much sexual intercourse. My British sensibilities have been impinged upon. What the fuck, dudes? Patrick McGoohan being in things that I like, maybe not a good thing, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Patrick McGoohan and Peter Falk, I can't think of a stranger friendship. Especially just to think of those two walking down the street together.
To hear that this is going to be a thing that persists and continues, and it's not just a one-off, I'm excited, but with a fair amount of trepidation.
Until we come back and talk about that, Chris, what are you up to these days?
Just working on podcasts over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where everything I work on can be found, other than Ranking on Bond, which is on our respective Patreons at the $10 level and higher once a month. If that's the thing you're interested in, which it might be. You can check it out there. What about you, Mike?
Pretty much the same thing all the way down the line. We definitely talk about that sexuality of James Bond and just how he's banging anything that moves a lot of times. He's worse than Captain Kirk.
McGowan wants none of that. How dare you? An affront to my British sensibilities that characters having sexual intercourse. Without a Jimmy hat as well? My God.
Jimmy hat. That's what they called it back then.
Jimmy hat. My old John Thomas. God, can you imagine Patrick McGowan hearing that penis song from Monty Python's Meaning of Life? Just like, oh my God. What is my ears hearing? God, such a fucking asshole. It's so weird because Patrick McGowan is just that this is the last moment before he becomes an integral part to the future history of this show. Is oof.
Yeah. For better or for worse. There are times where I really like McGowan and other times where I could really do without him. But in the next one, I like his character quite a bit. So I'm curious to get your reaction when we come back to talk about By Dawn's Early Light. Until then, stick around for that interview with David Koenig, and we will catch you next month. How did this one come together? How did you even decide to put this book together?
It came to me while working on shooting Columbo. I had access to a large number of scripts that didn't get filmed, several of which I refer to, but don't go into any depth on in shooting Columbo. And one of the themes of the production of the show Columbo was Peter Falk using the excuse and his producers as well of, I'm only doing 2 or 3 or 4 or 8, whatever, a small number of shows this year because we don't have enough good script. If we had more good scripts, we'd make more shows. That's why we only do a handful each year. And I'm getting access to some of these unused scripts, and I'm like, these are really good. How come you didn't make these? And so that's when it occurred to me is I wonder if is it just these half dozen that I stumbled on, or are there more? And why really didn't they get made? Because some of these, I was able to find close to 20 scripts, and most of them are really good or could have been good with a little massaging. There were several clunkers, but most of them could have been made into great episodes of Columbo.
Typically, how many people would work on a script for Columbo?
It would typically start with the person who pitched the story. And if they got to go ahead, most of the time they'd get to develop it themselves into a full teleplay that would run 80 to 100 pages. And then if everything went perfectly and smoothly, then just the story editor, or who Columbo called the executive story consultant, that person would smooth it. And then the executive producer, if it was a writing producer, of which until Peter Falk became the executive producer, most of the executive producers before him were writing producers. They came from a writing background, and they'd give it a once over. So that's in a perfect world, that's how many would work on it. Sometimes it'd get, that didn't work, we'll try it with you writing, and it could be 8 people working on it at some point.
And when it came to these, I know that you said several were treatments, and some of those would go, 25, 30 pages, and then you even found full-fledged scripts.
It surprised me because in interviewing some of the folks who worked on Columbo in the early years, and while working on shooting Columbo, a lot of writers would say, this story I was given was only 2 or 3 pages, and then I turned it into this full script. So I had assumed that most of the original story started like the Larry Cohen first batch of stories that started during the end of season 2, that they were just 2 or 3 pages. And then I started finding some of these, and it's very few. That there were a couple that were just a couple pages, but a lot of the Larry Cohen and other later stories were 20-some pages. They really developed. The fellow who wrote the screenplay for Any Old Port in a Storm made famous that, oh yeah, I was given these 2 or 3 pages and it was very little and just the bones of the thing. And then I created this masterpiece. And it's, no, Eric Cohen's his original story, and it's 25 pages and everything's there. He really gets, and many of the people who just get a story credit. The original story for Blueprint for Murder, which Levinson and Lake did, is almost the whole story. And it's they don't get credit as writing it, but really most of those ideas in that episode, short of the specific dialogue, it's all there.
Yeah, Larry Cohen just felt like a machine. You quote so many just of the titles. Other than the titles, how much were there for some of those other ones? Because you name off, what, like 10? You said that he wrote 10 different things?
Well, it was more than 10. It was between 12 and 20, of which I was able to view about a half dozen of them, not counting the ones that actually were used. There were about 4 or 5 of his that actually did inspire episodes. And he did this in a couple of months. How someone could be that creative. And his stories are really interesting. Some of them are not necessarily usable, but they're all pretty fully developed. I have unique clues, unique setups, and really interesting, unique settings and murderers. That's something that didn't happen from the go. It was in the beginning, there's this stereotypical prescription murder, ransom for a dead man type. Okay, let's get like the generic lawyer or psychiatrist. And he started giving them more interesting jobs and settings and taking them to the racetrack and other type things that weren't envisioned at the very start.
And of course, for me, the most satisfying thing was to hear the description or read the description of the Brian De Palma script. And just to finally know more about that, because I had read rumors and little snippets of things for years, but you finally just blew the lid off of that and walked us through so much of that story. And the story around the story, and just how De Palma was part of it and then wasn't, and then how Scorsese almost was part of it. Just a phenomenal tale. What a standout piece.
Now, what did you personally think about that, about the actual screenplay? Do you think it would have worked?
I love how they're talking about Paul Williams being the murderer, this very Truman Capote-esque murderer, which I think would have been interesting. I think that was before Murder by Death. So yes, you could have had that Paul Capote thing with that one. But yeah, to have all of those things and to have everything being shot from that small height, it just feels so much like he's getting ready for Phantom of the Paradise, or the ideas from that script make it into Phantom of the Paradise. But yeah, I love that whole thing, especially the 3 students that joined Columbo, which was very interesting because that seems to be a theme through so many of these scripts, is Columbo having a helper of different sorts.
Yeah, that's true. And it did make me wonder. I don't spell it out necessarily in the book, but I know Falk did not want regulars. He wouldn't mind having somebody once or twice, maybe, but he didn't want these strong characters that tagged along with him the whole time that could either steal the show a little bit or force his character into a repetitive dynamic. If he would have Wilson there every show, it would have suddenly turned into a buddy series, which he was not looking for that.
Which is interesting because he's so generous as an actor, at least in my opinion, that you get Hal Avery coming back so many different times, or just some of these other, Vito Scotti, of course, coming back multiple times. But yes, they're playing different characters. They're not always playing that same person.
He certainly didn't have a problem with bringing folks back, but reprising the same characters that he's saying. That's what he didn't like.
Of course, in that De Palma script, the thing that I liked the most was we got Bert again, because I missed Bert so much after those first few episodes.
Yeah, he had been gone for a few years. I get the impression reading that De Palma didn't know the show super well and just had seen a couple of episodes maybe and remembered, oh yeah, I remember Bert. I'm going to put him in, thinking he was, because you watch it in Dead Weight and Ransom for a Dead Man, and you think, oh, this is going to be a regular character through the whole thing. And then suddenly 3 months into the series, he disappears. So it makes me wonder if that's what he thought. Oh, he's part of the regular crew, so I'm going to put him in. But because his script it's amazing. And I think they could have made it work. Not exactly as it was written, need to be strengthened in certain areas or tweaked a little more like the regular Columbo. It could have been a terrific episode.
I got a little Waldo Lydecker in there as well, especially him being in the bathtub when the murder is taking place, or quote unquote in the bathtub.
Yeah. And all sorts of touches like that had never been done in a Columbo before, but it just seemed, wow, what a fresh way to look at it.
One of the things I like too, in those early days of Columbo, having Spielberg there in one of the first episodes, you get that very dynamic camera work, and you have it's not threatening Peter Falk as far as the director as the star versus him as the star, but it really gives you some good flavor. So having a strong director like a De Palma, I think, would have been a real boon to the show.
Oh, I think it would have been huge, because I think that's in some ways the show would suffer later when the directors, we won't say they're poor directors, but they didn't quite have the cachet to where Falk would trust them and say, okay, I trust you to do what, and I'll do whatever you want. Because if he did place that trust in you, he was going to give you whatever you wanted. And if what you wanted was a little misguided at times, as Patrick McGowan could be, it would take you in places that some of us disagree you should have gone in. But if you could have had more Spielberg, maybe a Scorsese or folks like that who would have commanded his respect and he would have gone along with them, what interesting places we could have been taken.
Oh, yeah. It could have been almost a little boot camp, because you already had Demi coming in there. Could have been like the postgraduate work from the Roger Corman School.
Oh, that would have been great. Yeah.
And the thing, too, that I appreciate about your book is that as you're describing these scripts, at the end of the description, you will break it down as far as what the weaknesses and strengths were, and then also what ideas would make their way into other scripts, or what ideas might have been recycled into those treatments or scripts.
Yeah, because some of them were, especially with clues, because Peter Falk loved his clues. So even if you had a problem with your script, whether like in the De Palma one, his main problem was that the killer was too colorful. He was afraid he would overshadow his own character, that's the main weakness of that script. If it has one huge weakness, it's that Columbo is underwritten in that his part is not very colorful, more than usual. He doesn't have a whole lot to do besides detective work. And this Truman Capote character is just over the top. He might get rid of a script for a reason like that, or because the story was weak. But if he saw a strong clue in there, he would put it in what they call his clue book, and he'd save it for later. And he would frequently get scripts that were pitched to them in which maybe he did like the story, and he'd go, I got a couple clues I want you to work. I don't know how you're gonna do it, but here's the clues. Work these into your script somehow.
We just covered last month Exercise and Fatality, and that just, I think you said in your book your first book, that there were a lot of recycled clues in there, and it felt like it.
There were some. The most interesting thing about that was how Larry Cohen successfully pitched that story. Is in his pitch to Columbo, he made a big deal about his shoelaces clue. He went over the top. Then the front page of his pitch was, this is a clue that has never been done, that all the millions of viewers at home can participate in the clue as they're seeing it. As they can take off their own shoes and tie them backwards. And never before in the history of television have people been able to solve the mystery themselves in their own home with their own shoes. So that always, I enjoyed that.
It's like Larry Cohen as William Castle.
Yes, he was. That's especially if you're Larry Cohen and you're pitching 15 stories at once. You got to make some of them stand out. And so quite a few of his treatments do have a little salesmanship built into there.
Did you find any favorites? Or were there any where you're just like, oh man, I really wish they would have made this?
There were a handful that I loved and that I think, if done properly, because especially in the later years, Columbo showed if done improperly, they could ruin anything. How good a clue or a story, if it was played wrong or written poorly, it wasn't going to work. But the De Palma script, I adored. That was wonderful. There was one that came 2 seasons later, almost came 2 seasons later, called War of the Crowd by Howard Burke, which was set in a circus, which they tried over and over to make, and they just couldn't get a good pop at the end. But he played a high wire performer in a circus. And it's just got so many wonderful, unique scenes. And my other two favorites there was one that originally started called Ladies Set for Death, which was the original Levinson and Link and Peter Fisher pilot for Mrs. Columbo. And when they pulled out of Mrs. Columbo, the script never got made, but Bill Link held onto the script. And when they needed scripts for the reboot of Columbo, he said, let's rewrite this one's such a good one, in which the murderer was like a Monty Hall, let's make a deal game show host. And it's just such a clever gotcha clue in which he's the murderer, but you don't know how he did it until the very end. And I'm reading the script going, how did he pull that off? Because it doesn't show how he successfully was able to get away with it. And then at the end, Columbo, and it's all very funny. And then, of course, my absolute favorite, and it's the one, if Columbo ever comes back, they have to make this. And that's the one that inspired Columbo's last case, called Hear No Evil. It is simply one of the best Columbo scripts I've ever read. By far the best unmade one I've ever read. And it's just, it's filled with everything. It writes Columbo perfectly. It's an interesting story. It's got clues that are really different. It's got some funny set pieces, and it has so many callbacks to the earlier days of Columbo that anybody who loves Columbo would just love this one all the way through.
Where are you finding all of these? Is there an archive at a university or a library, or these people's personal papers?
Some of them are spread out at various libraries. There's a couple that are at the Academy Library in Beverly Hills, the Margaret Herrick Library, where they have just a huge repository of writers and actors and directors have donated their personal papers to there. The Writers Guild has a large script collection, including a few unmade scripts, the Jackson Gillis one specifically, and a couple other locations. And a lot of them came from folks who worked on the show and had these scripts that they were never able to use, who sent me copies, which was very generous, and I appreciate it.
Were there better records for the older things or the newer things? There's always the split between the NBC days and the ABC days.
It's not necessarily records, because none of them came from NBC or Universal themselves. So it's not like one place was keeping records. It was just individual person by person. How many records did this writer, how many versions did they keep? I know one writer I spoke with who worked on the Columbo said, during COVID, I had to clear out my attic, and I think I just threw out all my old Columbo scripts. And I'm like, when am I ever going to need Columbo scripts? And I'm like, so I need your Columbo scripts. So it's just the individual person. That's been so gratifying to me, because the 2 books I've written out on Columbo, I don't think could have been written 10 years ago, because there just wasn't access to the material that I was blessed to receive. But over the last 10 to 15 years, as people have passed away or realizing they're getting close to the end of their time and have donated their personal collection to these archives. Is that when I wrote my first books on other subjects many years ago, this type of material was not around. And now a lot of people do have, if you look hard enough, some of it's out there.
You're talking about how the one script was almost a Mrs. Columbo. It was almost the finale. And then you've got these scripts, I believe it was Theodore Flicker, who his script for Columbo had also been pitched as a Macmillan and wife. And I can't remember if it was a third thing or not. These scripts move and change themselves. Are very mercurial, I imagine.
Exactly. And Ted Flicker, who was one of the co-creators of Barney Miller, was right before he helped create Barney Miller. His project was a Columbo that originally started as a Macmillan and wife. And since all these folks work together, Universal has a office building it used to be called the Producers Building. It's called like the John Ford Building or something different now, but it was a Producers Building where all the producers had their own offices. And so the guy, Paul Mason, who produced Macmillan and wife, was just right down the hall from the guy who did McCloud, who was the guy who did down the hall was the guy who did Banachek. And, so if they read it and they didn't think it was right for them, it was not unusual for them to go, and typically they tell the writer, I like this, but it's because his script is just bonkers as well, really, which has a murderer who's like a Mr. Rogers type character. So the producer of Macmillan and wife, like, wow, this is really good. I don't know if it's a Macmillan and wife, but maybe a Columbo. So he went down, he gave him some tips on, I've never written for Columbo, but I've helped him out around because they would always pass their scripts around. Can you take a read on this and give me your thoughts? And he made some suggestions, and Ted Flicker took the Macmillan and wife producers' suggestions and rewrote it as a Columbo and took it to the guys at Columbo, and they're like, this is pretty good. And they put it on the board of possible episodes for that season, and it was a little too different.
Mm-hmm. Hearing the details of that one, I was trying to picture it, and it was so unusual too to have Columbo there when the murder actually happened.
But an amazing, unforgettable murder. If nothing else, you get 2 pages in and you're like, wow, you just killed a guy on stage in front of us by insta-foaming him to death. It was, I suspect that was one of the big reasons they wanted to hope to make that one work, and it just never came to be.
And in front of probably screaming children as well.
Screaming children, yes, that would have been interesting to pull off because it was a kiddie show that the performer was killed doing. So it would have been a lot of little kids sitting around at the Hollywood Bowl.
I'm really glad that you talk about the rules or the guidelines that they had for the 89 show, especially the whole thing of these stories should be pulled from the headlines, which is very Law and Order-esque, but to have that in Columbo, because I recognize some of the events, some of the stories, but just since there was that kind of, it was 1989 in the early 90s, so I don't necessarily remember all of the headlines that were happening, but like the Uri Geller Amazing Randy thing, I thought that was wonderful.
That was the thought of the producer then, Richard Allen Simmons, who was the last producer at NBC of Columbo. He did the end of season 6 and all of season 7. And then he was the first producer when they started back up again. So of the first season back and the first show of the next season, even though that one was actually made before he got fired during the first season, but it took so long, it didn't air until the following season. But that was one of his ways he wanted to make the show not Columbo. He wanted it still to be Columbo because he really loved the character. But he was like, okay, how can I make this more like other shows that to me are more exciting? Because he didn't really like Columbo. Thought it was a little boring and formulaic, and it was too hard to just have this verbal chess match back and forth for 2 hours. So he wanted a little more action, a little more danger, a little more things, as you mentioned, tied to headlines. And those were his ideas. Also, he figured if he tied it to a recognizable personality type, it would be a much more marketable thing, and that his bosses at NBC and later at ABC would like it. So if you look back at everything he worked on for Columbo, all those season 7 and season 8 episodes, if you study him close enough, you can go, oh yeah, that character's based on Oliver North. Oh yeah, that's based on Agatha Christie. Oh yeah, that's every single one of them. He's based it on a real person.
It was a heartbreak to read the book and to hear about all of these great ideas, all of these great scripts. And you do a great job of saying that it probably didn't get made for this reason or this reason. But then you look at some of the episodes that did get made and you're just like, yeah, I would have rather have had that than like Last Salute to the Commodore.
Agreed. Times 100. They didn't bat 100 or 1,000. Maybe they did bat 100. Didn't bat 1,000 as far as which one they picked out at times. But I believe that the original script for the Columbos that did get made, most of those, it wasn't the original script's fault. The ones that have big weaknesses, there's usually a good story. And if it would have been given a little more time in some cases, or in most cases, I think they just made bad decisions in trying to make things funny or goofy when they shouldn't have been, or just some bad production decision that things got spiraled out of control during those last few years.
Were there things that you were trying to find that you could never find? You mentioned the one writer who might have thrown his scripts away. Were there other things that you knew of that you couldn't get your hands on?
There were. I would have loved to have actually read more of I read about half of Larry Cohen's submissions, and then the other half, there's no, except for the title and dates and such, there's no record of those. So he had some titles that, like A Murder at the Racetrack one, which I'm like, oh, I would have liked this, and a few others I would like to. And there was also the biggest white whale that I wasn't able to find was a story Stephen Bochco wrote that they tried to make, and they never did. And I could never try writing to his family and just could not find that script. And I don't even know the actual name of it, because in the production material in which they refer to it a number of times, because they almost made it, they always called it Orient Express in the Air. And it was always written in such a way, it was always written where when they were producing Last Salute to the Commodore, they always referred to it as the Marina story. Or when they were working on Roar of the Crowd, they always referred to it as the circus story. So I know it was just a nickname. That was the actual name of the episode. But that to me sounded like that's one I really would like to read, because this was at the same time that they were working on Last Salute to the Commodore. And I know they wanted to do like a traditional whodunit type multi-suspect murder mystery. So I'm sure that's what it was like, just set in an airplane instead of on a train. So that would have been fun. And hopefully one day that'll turn out.
So what's next for you? Are you going to be writing about Mrs. Columbo now?
Nope. I'm not a massive Mrs. Columbo. I like my Mrs. Columbo unseen is my preference. So I've got a few more Columbo projects. Maybe no future Columbo books as yet, but for the Blu-ray release in the United States of Columbo, the first ones came out, the NBC years came out last year, and they did a beautiful job with it. But at the last minute, after myself and a number of other commentators had done these incredible commentaries, audio commentaries to go with them, at the last minute, the producer realized they didn't get the rights to include any commentaries on this. And so even though they went through 7 months of work, they spent, I don't want to know how much money they spent to produce these things and audio engineer them and sync them up. And they were amazing. All these audio commentaries could not be used. So I know some of the other folks who worked on that have been trying to figure out, okay, all this information and interviews we conducted, what can we do with that? And I know a couple of the guys are trying to turn theirs into a book. And me, because so many of the material was recorded interviews and new insights, synced. I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can I, whether it's in audiobook form or something, that I can bring out a lot of these news stories and trivia, comments, and insights and interviews sync to the episodes rather than in book form. I think they would play better. So hopefully next year, some of us can start releasing some of those. They won't be the exact audio commentary, but based on a lot of the same information and hopefully 100 times better.
I told you I listened to the book, and what a coup getting Jason Culp to be the narrator.
Oh my gosh. For those folks who don't know Jason Culp, he's one of more than one son of Robert Culp, who's one of the iconic villains of Columbo. And Jason is not only an amazing actor in his own right, but he's one of the best known narrators of audiobooks out there. He's done, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, or I can't think of all the huge titles that he's done. And he was so kind to do Unshot Columbo. And he's the best. I could not have imagined somebody better. And his voice has that feel of his father, which is perfect. And he even does a little, when he does Columbo and telling these stories, a little Peter Falk slips in. He's just so good. And as much as I love to have people read the book, oh my gosh, but listen to the book is just a treat among treat.
Yeah, I love when he dips into his Columbo voice. It's fantastic. And just gives that little spice in there. It's never a soliloquy, but...
Yeah, just a little bit. And he does a pretty good Truman Capote there, too.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that was a real treat being able to hear him do all of those voices and it really lent itself to the audio form as well. The descriptions of these scripts, you really make them very compelling.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, I hope folks enjoy it because it's all the work of others. I'm just sharing other people's information and memories and such like that. So happy to be able to deliver it.
So other than the audio commentaries and trying to figure out what to do with those, what else are you working on these days?
Promoting whatever I've got to do. I've got to, hopefully at the end of the year or early next year, Shooting Columbo will be out in paperback. So that'll be expanded by a little bit. I don't know how much more information I'll put in for the paperback release, but we'll make that a little longer. And then hopefully around Christmas time, a book I wrote about 10 years ago about Danny Kaye. That'll finally be coming to paperback as well, and I'll expand. That'll be expanded as well. So those will be my latest book projects.
Is there a place for people to keep up with you and your work online?
Yep. They could certainly find me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, just for David Koenig or Dave Koenig, or I'm not too hard to find.
Mr. Koenig, thank you so much. It is always such a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Mike. I hope we can do it again very soon.
Hello, this is Chris Haskell from They Live by Film. For those that don't know us, Adam, Zach, and we built a podcast over the last 2 years that's a combination of film discussion from 3 very different perspectives, as well as industry interviews with the leaders in boutique Blu-ray and 4K community. We started with Deaf Crocodile, but over time we've been lucky enough to speak with Arrow Video, Severin, Mondo Macabro, Vinegar Syndrome, Radiance, Indicator, most of the OCN partner labels. It's been a blast. You can find us wherever you podcast, and also actually recently as part of Someone's Favorite Production Podcast Network. We hope to see you online.
Are you a film fan who loves the ultimate home video experience? Look no further than The Disconnected. Your host, Ryan Verrill, is your go-to source for the latest and most accurate information on home video releases, exclusive interviews with industry insiders and filmmakers, and has established a thriving community where every film and physical media enthusiast feels welcome. From hidden gems to blockbuster hits, The Disconnected brings you insider knowledge and a welcoming space to share your love of cinema. Watch every Thursday night at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific for the live announcements show and follow The Disconnected on social media to stay updated. Subscribe to The Disconnected on YouTube or on the podcast provider of your choice and dive into a world where every movie night is an adventure.